Hello, students. I hope you're ready for this week's topic. I must admit, it is the dirtiest topic of the year. Yes, this week's topic is pollution. And so we're going to be learning all about this dirty topic this week, talking about different types of pollution that exist and where the pollution comes from. So without any more delay, let's get right into our notes here today as we talk about pollution. Pollution is a release of substances which worsen the environment. We've been learning a lot about the environment this year and what a healthy environment looks like. Well, pollution includes things that are put into the environment that don't make it healthy, make it worse. And that's a bad thing. Now, there are some natural sources of pollution, and there are also some human sources of pollution. So before we get into the actual sources of pollution, let's talk about a couple of words that tie into how the pollution is actually introduced into the environment. So we'll begin with what's called point source pollution. Point source pollution is a source of pollution that can be traced to a single source, a single point, you might say. This picture here perfectly illustrates point source pollution. If we look at this image here in the background, we have just a beautiful pond or lake with some grasses growing where it is being very well fertilized by this effluent from, well, some type of factory or industry. Let's hope it's not from a wastewater treatment plant that isn't working, although it might be. So this pipe here is definitely introducing something into this water body other than water. I mean, just by visual inspection, you can see that that brown liquid, whether there are chunks in it or not, doesn't look like something you'd want to put into a glass and drink yourself. I mean, that would just be absolutely disgusting. And based on this picture, actually, you can see the vegetation that seems to be growing around where this pipe is emptying this liquid into the water. It's probably likely that whatever this material is providing some nourishment and fertilizer to a particular type of plant, which probably shouldn't even be growing in this water body. But the point in this slide is the pipe. If you look at the pipe, this is a single point, a point of introduction to whatever this is into the environment. This is what we're talking about when we talk about a point source pollution. If you were an environmental scientist and you were trying to find the source of pollution of this particular water body, just by using your eyes, you would very easily see that here is a point of introduction, this pipe. This is an example of point source pollution. These are probably the easiest introductions to pollution that you can trace back to its source. If you think about it, you can follow this pipe to where it comes from. Whether you would visually see that on the ground or whether you'd need maybe a metal detector under the ground to trace it all the way back to where it comes from, you'd be able to trace this back to a single point. So this is point source pollution. That is contrasted with the other source pollution, non-point source pollution. Non-point source pollution, not so easy. Non-point source pollution can't be traced to a single source. If you look at this sad picture, I mean, imagine you're taking a vacation at the shore and you go down to the beach and you see this. I hope you wouldn't just jump over it and jump into the water. You probably don't want to be swimming in the water near this. But look at some of the things in here. We see tires. We see lumber and construction debris. We see bottles and containers, and who knows what else might be in this particular picture. But you can't trace all of this garbage back to a single source. This comes from a lot of different places. This comes from a car. This comes from a refrigerator. This comes from a house. This comes from who knows where, but a lot of different sources. And it has been washed up on shore. Obviously, this is litter, trash, perhaps some hazardous material as well. If there's paint and chemical containers here, I mean, that's pretty bad stuff. But it's not coming from a single pipe. It's probably not coming from a single boat that was a barge for trash. It probably came from a lot of different sources. I mean, some of this trash may have actually been thrown off a road up a hill out of the sight of the picture. Who knows? But it came from a lot of different sources. So that's the big difference between point source and non-point source pollution as to whether you can or can't trace it back to a single source. So if we look at this picture here, we can actually identify some point and non-point sources of pollution on this illustration. Let's look at this picture. The lines here are identifying some non-point source pollutions, which can include an animal feedlot. We have those here in our township. We have a lot of farm fields and dairy farms near a stream. And so runoff can flow from a whole field, whether it's cropland or land that is used for grazing, whether it's fertilizer or animal fertilizer, or from farms, but farms can be a non-point source of pollution. Houses, homes, garbage from rural houses or from urban streets can wash down into watercourses every time it rains. These are all non-point sources because they come from a larger area and not just a single point. Wastewater treatment plants is more than likely a point source. Factories are a point source. In that previous picture, we saw how the pipes came into a water body. These type of facilities can provide a single outlet of pollution that can be traced back to a single source. Typically, it's easier to address point source pollution because we can create legislation or laws that protect the environment by addressing point source pollution, and it's easy to monitor those locations. You simply go to the point sources and you take samples. It's not so easy to take samples from large areas where non-point source pollution comes from. It's a lot more difficult to control and regulate those types of sources. So, regardless of whether we're discussing point or non-point source pollution, let's talk about three different kinds of pollution in the first place. We're going to talk about these three types, beginning with land pollution, and we can see that illustration with the garbage looks pretty nasty. We're going to talk about air pollution, the pollution that we can see in the atmosphere, and finally, water pollution, pollution that enters the hydrosphere somewhere along the way. So as we begin, let's start with number one, land pollution. Land pollution is also known as solid waste or garbage. How many of you have ever thrown something out? We all have. How many of you have ever thrown something out into a trash can. Yeah, hopefully we all have. We use the proper place to throw things out. Now, how many of you know where that trash goes? Well, maybe it's one of your chores to bring the trash out to the street once a week or twice a week, whatever your garbage collection might be. And then a garbage truck comes along and picks up your bag or can of garbage, puts it in the garbage truck. So that's where your garbage goes, right? Nope, that's just temporary because that garbage truck is going to go somewhere to empty itself out. It may go to a landfill, like we're seeing in this picture here, or it might go to an incinerator where it burns up the trash and maybe even makes energy from it, electricity. But that solid waste, that garbage, needs to go somewhere. A lot of garbage that is produced comes from our own homes. And if you think back to a couple topics ago, there are things we can do to reduce, reuse, and recycle to lower the amount and minimize the solid waste that we produce each and every day. Another source of land pollution is from agricultural fields, from farming. Fertilizers are an introduction to land pollution, whether it's natural fertilizers from cows or chickens, or whether we're talking about chemical fertilizers from a chemical company. Too much of a good thing isn't a good thing anymore. And if there's an over application of fertilizers to the land, well, when it rains, it pours. When it rains, that runoff can carry with it fertilizers, those chemicals, into the water where they don't belong. Another source of land pollution is what's called slash and burning. This has taken place a lot in the rainforests of planet Earth, in particular the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. There's been a lot of slashing, which means cutting down of trees, and then burning those trees, slashing and burning those trees in order to produce land used, a lot of that land is used for grazing for beef cattle, which are used to, feed us. We like to eat hamburgers, and a lot of our hamburger meat comes from beef grown in areas that were once tropical rainforests. But here's the deal. Slashing and burning, not the best way to get grazing land. Slashing and burning, especially in rainforest areas, does nothing really but deplete the soil. Remember when we learned about erosion and deposition? Well, you get rid of all the trees and the vegetation holding soil together, and when it rains, which happens a lot in tropical regions, all that topsoil just washes away into the water bodies and eventually into the sea. That's a lot of land pollution washing away. It also happens in the Midwest of the United States. Pretty much the whole southern part of Louisiana is a gigantic river delta from the Mississippi River that is a river delta from the Mississippi River that's caused from all the deposition of soil that has washed out of that watershed. All right, another source of land pollution is strip mining. And no, that doesn't mean inappropriate things. It's not like the coal and minerals are taking their clothes off, but strip mining refers to areas like West Virginia where entire mountain tops are taken off. They are excavated. They are stripped away, and it looks like this, in order to extract primarily coal, but there could be minerals that are being extracted as well. But strip mining, again, you are removing Forests, you're removing vegetation, which allows soil to wash away, and it also allows, well, coal and mineral as well to be washing away into the watercourses every time it rains. So that's another source of pollution. Let's continue with land pollution. Another one is hazardous waste. Hazardous waste typically comes from different classes of chemicals. If you look at this picture here, we've got a lot of things that you probably have either in your own home or in your own garage, from motor oil and gasoline to paint to cleaning products. All of these are chemicals that don't come from the environment and shouldn't be returned to the environment. Solvents and chemicals, these chemicals that are produced by human beings are hazardous to organisms that live in the environment. Whether you're talking about plants or animals, they are dangerous. And so that's another source of land pollution. One more source of land pollution is radioactive waste or nuclear waste. Now, we may not want to admit it, but we all are eager for energy. We're all basically greedy for energy. Think about all of the devices that we use and operate every day. We want energy. Some of our energy comes from nuclear power plants. Nuclear power plants produce an enormous amount of electricity, and they're very efficient as well. But one of the byproducts of using nuclear energy is that there is waste, nuclear waste. We call it radioactive waste. And as you will learn in physical science, radioactive waste, depending upon what it is, can be around for literally millions of years. You can't get rid of it. It doesn't biodegrade, it decays radioactively. And you can't really speed up radioactive decay. And so this radioactive waste or nuclear waste has to be stored somewhere. And nobody wants this stored in your backyard. I know I wouldn't, and I don't think you would either. Because if this stuff gets out, it's going to cause a lot of diseases and a lot of damage to the environment. And, well, lots of sickness can arise. So even though we use the energy, we don't like the byproducts that result. In fact, here's a map. Here's a map of nuclear waste facilities. And if you look at the colors on this map, Illinois, Pennsylvania have more than 5 tons of stored uranium, radioactive uranium. And if you look at these yellow dots, those are storage sites, storage facilities. You can see a lot of them are on the eastern half of the United States, primarily because that's where a big population of people is that use the energy. But you'll see there's a lot of western states here don't have any storage facilities, and that's primarily because, well, there's not a lot of people who live there who need the energy in the first place. So right here in New Jersey, we have storage facilities as well. In fact, in the United States, we haven't had a new nuclear facility built since the 1970s, I believe, when 3 Mile Island, an accident that took place in Pennsylvania, kind of discouraged the further usage of nuclear energy in our country. The very first nuclear power plant was actually produced here in New Jersey, Oyster Creek. And the bottom line is this: the nuclear power plants, they basically, for the most part, they store their own waste. They store their own waste at the nuclear facility. So any nuclear power plant that exists, they are storing their nuclear waste on site. And so there is no one place in the country where all the nuclear waste is stored. And there's going to come a time when they can't store any more. And we'll have to address, well, what are we going to do with all of the spent fuel rods, this nuclear radioactive waste, to store it more long term? Because these sources of radioactive waste are going to be around a lot longer than the human species may be around. And so we want to keep future generations safe from this waste. So we have to think about, well, what are we going to do about it? Now, that was a mouthful. We just talked a lot about land pollution here today. And I think we are ready for a break from our notes. So until next time, I'm going to say bye bye.